guys. So you are going to go ahead and take 2-column notes on the information discussed in this video. This video will talk about the Punic Wars. We'll also talk about Julius Caesar, and we'll also talk about the end of the Roman Republic. So after you finish the video, show me your notes. I'll give you credit. And after you take the notes, you need to take the video quiz, which will be posted on Classroom. So here we go. So we are focusing on the Punic Wars, and there were 3 of these wars, okay? So remember, only write down what is underlined. First, before we talk about the Punic Wars, let's talk about the Roman army in general. So Roman legions are pretty much the main Roman force. And a legion is divided into groups. Each legion had about 5,000 men. They had their own banner, their own member, their own members, own numbers, symbols, and nicknames. Soldiers served for 25 years. They're very well organized and pretty much helped Rome to conquer the known world. So if you need to pause, make sure you pause so you can write down the notes. In terms of Rome's expansion, by 272 BC, Rome had pretty much controlled the entire Italian peninsula. So they pretty much had control over the entire boot. And we'll look at maps as we go through this so you can see what I'm talking about. The trade and its expansion into different parts of the Mediterranean pretty much brought it into conflict with a group of people called the Carthaginians. Now, the Carthaginians were located in northern Africa. They used to be Phoenicians. I know we talked about them a long time ago with Mesopotamia, but they were Phoenicians and had set up their own kind of trading empire. They conquered many parts of northern Africa as well as parts of Spain. Between 264 and 146 BC, Rome and Carthage were pretty much at war with each other for pretty much what was the biggest wars in Roman history. So the Punic Wars were a series of 3 wars between Rome and Carthage. And the main reason for this fighting was over trade. Rome was just kind of getting started. They wanted more land to have further control of the Mediterranean Sea. And the only way for them to accomplish this was to defeat the people of Carthage. So this is what Rome looked like before the Punic Wars. All right. As you can see, Rome has all the red. Carthage has all the purple. All right. The first Punic War, nothing really happened. A lot of people get killed, and they fight for 20 years. In the end, Rome is able to get Sardinia, Sicily, Corsica after they defeat Carthage. So here's a map of what Rome looks like after that. So remember, in this map, all they had was the foot, the leg. But in this map, after the first Punic War, they have all 3 of these parts: Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica, firmly under their control after the first Punic War. The second Punic War actually happens. Rome declares war on Carthage, and it starts. Carthage is led by a great general by the name of Hannibal Barca. And his father fought in the first Punic War. And so Hannibal determines that he's going to spend his entire life trying to find ways to get revenge against the Romans. So this second war was years in the making. Carthage had pretty much planned on what they wanted to do. So what Hannibal does, Hannibal actually comes from here and sneaks all the way over here into the Alps, and pretty much for 15 years kind of sneak attacks, but doesn't directly attack Rome. So for 15 years, Hannibal pretty much attacks camps, towns, cities, whatever he can without actually trying to attack the city of Rome. So he pretty much harassed the Romans as much as he could in those 15 years. And what Hannibal is known for is he brought over 90,000 soldiers, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants to fight against the Romans. Of course, a lot of those elephants and all those soldiers would die because when you go over the Alps, there are some cliffs, and unfortunately, things fall off cliffs when we're talking about mountains. So Rome responds. Rome couldn't kill or capture Hannibal, so they just say, you know what, we're just going to attack Carthage. So Hannibal leaves Italy to try and defend Carthage. By that time, it's too late. Carthage pretty much is kicked out of Europe. and has to pay a very large fine to Rome, pretty much debilitating them completely, saying, "Look, you have to have a smaller army, have a smaller navy, and you have to pay us a lot of money every single year to make up for all the loss that your general has given us." So the Romans continue to look for Hannibal, and they don't catch up to him until he's 64. So it takes a long time for them to find him, and he decides to poison himself rather than be captured because he said it's literally not worth it. The Romans are going to do some really bad things to him, so he'd rather just commit suicide. So this is how big Rome is after the Second Punic War. So Carthage is still stuck here. The Romans got this. They also got part of that too. And Carthage is pretty much right there. So you would think the Romans are done. No, sir. No, ma'am. They are not. So the Third Punic War really wasn't a war. Carthage is destroyed by the Romans. It's kind of a sneak attack. Carthage has a small navy. They don't have a lot of supplies. And so Rome is able to come in and just destroy them. They enslaved 50,000 men, women, and children. And even the legend says that the Romans salt the earth. And when you salt the earth, you pretty much destroy any possibility of things growing there. And there's still parts of that area in northern Africa where crops still don't grow. So the ones that are left in Carthage pretty much come under control of the Romans and pretty much have to continue to pay taxes and do what the Romans say, at least those that are left. And now, after the Third Punic War, this is how big Rome is. And as we will see later on, Rome does pretty much conquer all of this and all of this as well, but we're not there yet. In terms of how the Punic War has impacted people, they had major impacts on Rome. Firstly, Rome is now a vast empire in the Mediterranean region. Again, look at this map. They eventually take over the rest of this. So now they pretty much have a lot of power and territory in the Mediterranean region. All right. There are a lot of slaves that are brought to Rome, and they take plebeian jobs. Remember, the plebeians are the lower class of people. The plebeians are everyone else that does all the work that no one else wants to do. And the Romans, with those 50,000 slaves they got from this war, start bringing them over and say, look, you guys can take the plebeian jobs now. And finally, the gap between the rich and the poor grow, and it leads to a lot of unrest and conflict. Just like looking at our country now, we have the same issues. There's such a huge gap between the rich and the poor that's causing a lot of internal issues. Well, guess what? Rome is going through that as well. So this is a video. We'll actually watch this video as a class probably tomorrow. All right, make a big old squiggly line so that you know the difference and you can separate. And now we get to what ends up destroying and ending the Roman Republic. Now, the Republic, and not Rome itself, but just the Republican style of government, goes through a lot of change after the Punic Wars. First, a lot of leaders, many leaders try to step in to try to fix things because, like I said, there's a conflict going on between the rich and the poor, and it just continues to get worse. But there are a couple leaders that tried to come in and fix it, but their ideas are rejected. The Senate rejects their ideas and kills most of them. There are these two brothers, Tiberius and Gracchus, and they were killed by the Senate because they wanted to make some changes to help out the poor. There are other people who also want to change it too, but it didn't work. So what happens is a civil war does actually happen. A guy by the name of Gaius Marius actually kind of steps in, and he gets named dictator, and there's wars going on for a long time within Rome between the rich and the poor, between two different groups. And eventually the consuls do return to Rome after the Civil War to try and fix it, but the Republic pretty much has no power, and it pretty much loses all control. It is this guy, okay, Julius Gaius, or Gaius Julius Caesar, who pretty much signals the complete end of the Roman Republic as we know it. Julius Caesar, in 59 BC, was elected as consul, and Julius had a privileged life. He was a patrician, but he was a poor patrician. So though his family didn't have a lot of money, they were still pretty well off. He married a lady named Julia. Of course, he would marry Cleopatra later on, but he married a lady named Julia, and Julia's family was uber rich, and that allowed him to have some money. He decided to serve in the army. He ran for office and became consul in 59 BC. Now, rather than just stick with the two consuls, he says, you know what? I think there should be three. So he takes a friend of his named Crassus and a friend named Pompey, and they pretty much rule Rome for a short period of time. So rather than just the Senate and the consuls and the assemblies, you now have three consuls, the Senate and the assemblies, and these consuls actually take power away from the Senate. Caesar was also a military general, and he assembled an army and conquered Gaul. When the Senate got mad at him at first and pretty much was thinking about, getting rid of him and getting rid of him then, he pretty much says, you know what? Me and my soldiers, we're going to go to France, and we're going to fight for France, and we're going to bring France under our control so that you all will be happy with us. Or so he thought. So he was very successful, but because of this success, the Senate became afraid of him. And so the Senate, told him, like, if you ever come back to Rome, especially if you come with your army, that is like you asking for a war, because Caesar wanted to come back. But they said, look, you can come back, but don't come back with an army. Now, Caesar, being the smart man that he was like, look, I'm not dumb. All right. I'm going to bring my soldiers, and we're going to control Rome, and you guys are going to like it. So he crosses the Rubicon River, declares war on his enemies, and it starts a civil war again. In 46 BC, Caesar becomes dictator. And as you guys know, the dictator is someone who takes power for a short period of time. But while Caesar's dictator, he does a lot of things that people enjoy. And I'll go to this slide real quick and I'll go back. He passed a lot of reforms for the poor. He gives his soldiers land and money. He expands citizenship so that more people could become citizens. And pretty much everyone liked him, except the Senate. Caesar's reign pretty much ends the Republican style of government. The Senate loses power, the assemblies lose power, and power is focused and concentrated in one person once again. On March 15th, 44 BC, Caesar is murdered by a group of senators because they're mad at him. They call themselves the Liberators. And they believe that by killing Caesar, the Senate could get back its power and everything will be perfectly fine. Wrong. They are utterly wrong. They are extremely wrong. There are so many people who loved Julius Caesar and love what Caesar did that a revolt begins, another civil war starts. And you may ask, who leads the civil war? It is these three guys. The second triumvirate, Octavian, Mark Antony, and a guy named Lepidus, who's not that important. After Caesar's death, three men take over. Mark Antony, Octavian, who is Caesar's grandnephew and successor, and Lepidus. This was the second triumvirate. And their entire goal was to kill all those who did kill Caesar. And they do a pretty good job of it. They go around and they murder a lot of the senators that killed Caesar. They even killed a couple people who thought about killing Caesar. And so once again, the Senate loses power because it's losing people. And this group, this second triumvirate, these three guys pretty much avenge Julius Caesar's death. And you would think that Rome would be in a little bit of a peace after that. Not at all. And finally, another civil war, big one, breaks out between Octavian and Mark Antony. Mark Antony joins forces with his new lover, Cleopatra, who, as we all know, was also married to Julius Caesar, who was also married to somebody else. Yeah, very scandalous. Very scandalous. The second civil war breaks out between Antony and Octavian for control over Rome. Octavian wins, and he pretty much gains all control over Roman lands. And this, at this point, ends the Roman Republic completely. And now you begin to a situation where the Roman Empire starts, which we will start in the next lesson. So a quick recap, and I'm going to go backwards. All right, so a civil war breaks out between Octavian and Mark Antony for control of Rome. The reason these two guys are fighting with each other is because at one point they were a part of the second triumvirate with Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, and their all purpose was to kill Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was killed on March 15th, 44 BC, because a group of senators were afraid that he had too much power, and so they decided to murder him. Caesar was a great leader. He passed a lot of reforms to help people.